Sarah Chen had always been invisible. At 18, she blended into the crowd of thousands at State University like a single drop in an ocean. Her dorm room was on the third floor of Morrison Hall, sandwiched between a party-loving sorority girl and a pre-med student who never slept. Sarah's daily routine was predictable. Wake up at 7, grab coffee from the campus cafe, attend her engineering classes, study in the library until closing, then return to her tiny room to video call her parents in California. Her father worked as a software engineer for a tech startup, while her mother taught elementary school. They were proud of their daughter's full scholarship to study aerospace engineering, but they worried about her quiet nature. Sarah had always been brilliant with numbers and physics, solving complex equations while her classmates struggled with basic calculus. Her professors noticed her exceptional talent, especially Dr. Martinez, who taught advanced propulsion systems. What Sarah didn't know was that her final project on satellite trajectory optimization had caught attention far beyond the university walls. Her innovative approach to fuel-efficient orbital mechanics had been flagged by a computer algorithm that scanned academic databases for promising research. The algorithm belonged to a government agency that most people had never heard of, and it had been designed to identify potential assets in the civilian population. 3 weeks into her second semester, Sarah submitted her research paper on quantum-enhanced navigation systems for deep space missions. The work was theoretical but groundbreaking, proposing a method to use quantum entanglement for instantaneous position tracking across vast distances. Her professor was amazed by the sophistication of her calculations and the practical applications she outlined. Unknown to Sarah, her paper was forwarded to the Department of Defense within hours of submission. A team of analysts in a windowless building in Virginia spent 2 days reviewing her work, cross-referencing her background, and running security clearance protocols. They discovered that Sarah Chen was not just academically gifted, she was potentially vital to national security. The young freshman had no idea that her quiet life was about to change forever. She continued attending classes, eating dinner alone in the cafeteria, and spending evenings working on homework. Her biggest concern was whether she would make any real friends before graduation. She had always been shy, preferring books to parties, equations to small talk. On a Tuesday morning in March, Sarah was sitting in her thermodynamics class when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. Please report to the dean's office immediately. This is not a drill. She assumed it was a prank from one of her classmates, but when Professor Williams received a phone call during the lecture and asked Sarah to gather her things, her stomach dropped. Walking across campus to the administration building, Sarah tried to think of any reason she might be in trouble. Her grades were perfect, she had never violated any campus rules, and her student loans were current. The autumn leaves crunched under her feet as she climbed the stone steps to the dean's office, completely unaware that satellite surveillance had been tracking her movements for the past week. The secretary looked nervous when Sarah announced herself, quickly ushering her into a conference room where Dean Patterson waited with 2 people she had never seen before. The woman wore a dark suit and had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. The man beside her looked like he could bench press a car. Both had the kind of intense focus that made Sarah feel like a specimen under a microscope. Dean Patterson's voice was gentle but serious as he explained that Sarah's academic work had attracted some very important attention. The woman introduced herself as Agent Rodriguez from a government agency she couldn't name, and explained that Sarah's research had potential applications that went far beyond civilian space exploration. They needed her help with a project that could change the course of history. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. This felt like something from a movie, not real life. She was just a freshman who spent her Friday nights solving differential equations for fun. How could she possibly be important to the government? Agent Rodriguez explained that sometimes the most significant breakthroughs came from unexpected places, and Sarah's unique perspective on quantum navigation was exactly what they needed. The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which Sarah learned that her research aligned perfectly with a classified project involving next-generation military satellites. They needed someone who could think outside conventional parameters, someone whose mind wasn't constrained by existing military doctrine. Sarah's youth and fresh perspective were assets, not limitations. By the time she left the conference room, her head was spinning with possibilities she had never imagined. The next few days passed in a blur of background checks, interviews, and paperwork that Sarah never fully understood. Agent Rodriguez had given her a secure phone with only one contact programmed into it, and instructions to tell no one about their conversation. Sarah found herself lying to her roommate about where she had been, claiming she was meeting with academic advisors about advanced placement courses. Sleep became elusive as Sarah's mind wrestled with the magnitude of what she had gotten involved in. During her physics lab, she caught herself staring out the window, wondering if any of the passing students were also being watched by government agents. The ordinary college life she had been living just days ago now felt like a carefully constructed facade, and she wasn't sure which reality was more authentic. Dr. Martinez noticed the change in Sarah's demeanor during office hours. Her usual enthusiasm for discussing propulsion systems had been replaced by distracted responses and nervous glances toward the door. When he asked if everything was all right, Sarah managed a weak smile and blamed stress from her course load. She hated lying to her favorite professor, but Agent Rodriguez had been very clear about the consequences of breaking confidentiality. On Friday evening, while her dorm mates were getting ready for parties, Sarah received a call on the secure phone. Agent Rodriguez's voice was calm but urgent as she explained that Sarah's security clearance had been expedited through channels that typically took months to navigate. They needed her at a classified facility over the weekend to consult on a problem that had stumped their best engineers for 6 months. The facility was located 3 hours away, hidden behind unmarked gates in what appeared to be a nature preserve. Sarah was picked up at dawn by a driver who said nothing during the entire journey, responding to her nervous questions with polite nods and silence. The landscape gradually changed from suburban sprawl to dense forest, and eventually to a complex of low concrete buildings that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Inside the facility, Sarah was introduced to a team of physicists and engineers who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Dr. Sarah Chen, barely 19 years old, was younger than most of their graduate assistants, yet she had been brought in to solve a problem that had consumed millions of dollars in research funding. The project leader, Colonel Hayes, explained the situation with military precision. Their experimental satellite system was experiencing navigation failures that defied conventional physics. The quantum entanglement protocols that were supposed to provide instantaneous positioning data were producing results that seemed impossible. The satellites were reporting locations that couldn't exist according to Einstein's theories of relativity. Sarah's paper had proposed theoretical solutions to exactly these kinds of paradoxes. Working through the weekend in a windowless laboratory, filled with supercomputers and classified technical manuals, Sarah discovered that the problem wasn't with the satellites themselves. The issue was with the fundamental assumptions about how quantum entanglement behaved in the presence of Earth's magnetic field. Her fresh perspective, unencumbered by decades of conventional thinking, led her to propose a calibration method that had never been attempted. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, requiring only a software modification rather than expensive hardware changes. When the updated protocols were uploaded to the satellite constellation on Monday morning, the positioning errors disappeared completely. Colonel Hayes looked at Sarah with newfound respect, realizing that they had just witnessed the kind of breakthrough that changed entire fields of science. News of Sarah's success traveled quickly through classified channels. By Tuesday, she was fielding calls from Pentagon officials who wanted to discuss her future career prospects. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had spent most of her life avoiding the spotlight. But Sarah began to understand that her quiet days of anonymity were permanently behind her. Agent Rodriguez explained that Sarah's work had implications far beyond satellite navigation. The principles she had discovered could revolutionize everything from military communications to space exploration. However, with such knowledge came responsibility, and Sarah would need to make some difficult decisions about her future. The government was prepared to offer her opportunities that most people could only dream of, but accepting would mean leaving her normal college life behind. The weight of these revelations pressed down on Sarah as she returned to campus. Her dorm mates welcomed her back with stories of weekend parties and romantic drama that now seemed impossibly trivial. She sat in her thermodynamics class on Wednesday morning, watching her classmates take notes on basic heat transfer equations, knowing that she had just spent the weekend working on technology that was decades ahead of anything in their textbooks. 2 weeks after her weekend at the classified facility, Sarah's life had settled into an uncomfortable routine of secrets and lies. She continued attending classes, but her mind often wandered to the quantum navigation problem and its implications. Her professors had begun to notice her distraction, and her grades, while still excellent, showed signs of the stress she was under. The secure phone remained silent for several days, leading Sarah to wonder if her brief foray into the world of government secrets was over. She almost hoped it was. The constant vigilance required to maintain her cover story was exhausting, and she missed the simple pleasure of focusing entirely on her studies. When Agent Rodriguez finally called, her tone was more serious than Sarah had ever heard it. A situation had developed that required Sarah's immediate attention. The satellite constellation she had helped fix was now detecting unusual activity in international waters. Foreign vessels were moving in patterns that suggested they had somehow gained access to classified navigation data. If enemy forces had cracked their quantum encryption protocols, it would represent a catastrophic security breach with global implications. Sarah was pulled out of her differential equations class with no explanation, driven to a nearby airfield and flown to a military base she had never heard of. The urgency of the situation was evident in everyone's behavior. Military personnel moved with the kind of focused intensity that suggested lives were at stake. Colonel Hayes met her plane personally, his usual professional demeanor replaced by barely controlled concern. In a secure briefing room, Sarah learned the full scope of the crisis. Intelligence agencies had detected coordinated movements by foreign naval forces that suggested they were testing the limits of American satellite surveillance. More troubling was evidence that they were succeeding in areas where they should have been completely visible to monitoring systems. The quantum navigation network that Sarah had fixed was somehow being compromised. The technical team had been working around the clock for 3 days without making progress. Every theoretical approach they attempted hit the same wall. The foreign vessels seemed to disappear from quantum tracking in ways that violated the fundamental principles of the technology. Sarah's unique understanding of the calibration protocols made her the only person who might be able to identify what was going wrong. Working with a sense of urgency she had never experienced, Sarah dove into the raw data streaming from the satellite network. The quantum signatures were indeed anomalous, but not in the way anyone had expected. Rather than being jammed or spoofed, the entanglement protocols were being exploited using a technique that turned her own calibration method against itself. Someone had reverse-engineered her solution and found a way to weaponize it. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her breakthrough, which she had been so proud of, was now being used against her own country. The elegant mathematical solution that had seemed so purely academic was enabling enemy forces to operate invisible to American surveillance. She felt a crushing sense of responsibility for the crisis unfolding around her. Colonel Hayes recognized the look on Sarah's face and quickly reassured her that the responsibility lay with the intelligence community's failure to anticipate this possibility. The enemy's technical sophistication was far beyond what anyone had expected, and their ability to adapt Sarah's work so quickly suggested resources and expertise that were deeply concerning. The immediate priority was finding a countermeasure. Sarah spent the next 18 hours in a state of intense focus that transcended normal human limitations. She consumed coffee and energy bars without tasting them, filled whiteboards with equations that evolved and transformed as her understanding deepened. The solution, when it finally emerged, was more complex than anything she had previously attempted. The countermeasure required implementing a dynamic encryption layer that would constantly modify the quantum entanglement signatures in unpredictable patterns. It was mathematically elegant but computationally intensive, requiring processing power that pushed the satellite systems to their absolute limits. The risk was significant. If Sarah's calculations were wrong, they could lose the entire navigation network. As technicians prepared to upload her modifications to the satellite constellation, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The success or failure of a critical military operation now depended on equations she had derived while surviving on caffeine and determination. Colonel Hayes stood beside her as they initiated the upload sequence. both knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Sarah's academic brilliance could translate into real-world operational success. The modification sequence completed without errors, and within minutes, the foreign vessels reappeared on tracking displays across the command center. Their attempts to exploit the quantum navigation system had been completely neutralized. Sarah watched the tactical displays update in real time, showing enemy positions with crystal clarity for the first time in days. The relief in the command center was palpable, but Sarah understood that this victory was likely temporary. The technological arms race had only just begun. The success of Sarah's countermeasures brought attention from the highest levels of government. Within days of neutralizing the foreign navigation threat, she found herself in secure video conferences with officials whose names she recognized from news broadcasts. The transition from invisible freshman to critical national asset had happened so quickly that Sarah barely had time to process the magnitude of her new reality. Agent Rodriguez explained that Sarah's unique position, brilliant enough to solve problems that stumped experienced teams, yet young enough to think beyond conventional limitations, made her invaluable to national security. However, this value also made her a target. Intelligence reports suggested that foreign agents were already investigating American universities, looking for the source of the navigation breakthrough they had been unable to counter. Sarah's safety required immediate and dramatic changes to her life. She was moved from her dormitory to a secure apartment off campus, complete with surveillance systems and panic buttons that connected directly to federal response teams. Her class schedule was modified to avoid predictable patterns, and her movements were constantly monitored by protective details that maintained careful distance to preserve the illusion of normalcy. The psychological pressure of living under constant threat was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Every stranger on campus became a potential enemy agent. Every unexpected phone call a possible security breach. She found herself analyzing her classmates' behavior for signs of surveillance, wondering if the friendly graduate student who had started sitting near her in the library was really just interested in studying together. Colonel Hayes arranged for Sarah to receive advanced training in operational security and threat awareness. The weekend sessions, disguised as internship activities, taught her to recognize surveillance techniques, identify potential threats, and respond to emergency situations. Sarah learned to scan crowds for unusual behavior, to vary her routes between classes, and to maintain situational awareness that would have seemed paranoid just months earlier. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on Sarah. She had chosen aerospace engineering because she loved the pure mathematics of orbital mechanics, the clean precision of equations that governed the movement of celestial bodies. Now she was trapped in a world of human conflict where her mathematical gifts had made her a chess piece in a global game she barely understood. Her academic performance began to suffer as the stress of her double life mounted. Professor Williams noticed her distraction during lectures and invited her to discuss her apparent loss of focus. Sarah found herself crafting elaborate lies about family problems and financial stress, hating how easily the deception came to her. The person she was becoming felt increasingly distant from the quiet, honest student she had been just months before. The secure phone delivered news that changed everything. Intelligence sources had identified the foreign team responsible for exploiting Sarah's navigation protocols. They were not just military technicians, but a specialized unit that had been systematically targeting American scientific research for years. Sarah's breakthrough had been on their watch list since the day she submitted her original paper, and they had been planning to acquire her work, or her, long before the satellite crisis. Agent Rodriguez's voice carried a gravity that made Sarah's blood run cold. The foreign team was preparing to make a direct approach, likely through seemingly innocent academic channels. They would probably pose as researchers from prestigious international institutions, offering collaboration opportunities or graduate school placements that would give them access to Sarah's knowledge. The government's response would need to be equally sophisticated. The plan that emerged from strategy sessions Sarah wasn't allowed to attend was both elegant and terrifying. Rather than simply protecting her, they would use Sarah as bait to identify and neutralize the entire foreign network. She would continue her normal academic activities, while government agents monitored every approach made to her. When the foreign team revealed themselves, federal forces would be ready to respond. Sarah's role required her to act naturally while being acutely aware of every interaction, to maintain her academic facade while serving as the centerpiece of a counterintelligence operation. The training she had received in threat recognition would now be put to the test in real-world conditions where a single mistake could compromise the entire mission or put her life in danger. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Sarah had become the focal point of an international conflict that could determine which nation controlled the next generation of military technology. Her childhood dreams of working for NASA and exploring the stars seemed impossibly naive compared to the harsh realities of technological warfare she now understood. As she prepared for what Agent Rodriguez called active engagement with hostile elements, Sarah realized that her quiet life as an anonymous freshman was gone forever. Whether the upcoming operation succeeded or failed, she would emerge as a completely different person. The shy, brilliant girl who had started college just months earlier was being forged into something harder and more dangerous by forces beyond her control. The first contact came during Sarah's advanced physics seminar on a Thursday afternoon in late April. Dr. Petrov introduced himself as a visiting researcher from the International Space Consortium, expressing interest in Sarah's published work on quantum navigation systems. His accent was barely detectable, his credentials impeccable, and his knowledge of cutting-edge physics impressive enough to fool most academics. But Sarah's training kicked in immediately. His questions were too specific, too focused on the classified aspects of her research that had never been published. When he suggested a private meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities, Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the approach Agent Rodriguez had predicted. Sarah agreed to meet Dr. Petrov for coffee the next day, while mentally rehearsing the communication protocols that would alert her government handlers. That evening, Sarah used the secure phone to report the contact. Agent Rodriguez's response was immediate and intense. Surveillance teams were already in position around campus. Communication intercepts were active, and tactical response units were standing by. Sarah would proceed with the meeting while being monitored by some of the most sophisticated intelligence assets the government possessed. The coffee shop meeting felt surreal. Dr. Petrov was charming and knowledgeable, discussing recent developments in theoretical physics with the enthusiasm of a genuine academic. He mentioned sabbatical opportunities at prestigious European institutions, research grants that could fund Sarah's graduate studies, and collaboration possibilities with Nobel Prize winners. The offer was everything a young scientist could dream of. Sarah played her role perfectly, expressing appropriate excitement while asking questions that would encourage Dr. Petrov to reveal more about his true intentions. She mentioned her current research projects, carefully sharing information that had been approved by her handlers while watching for his reactions. When he pressed for details about her navigation algorithms, Sarah knew she had confirmed his identity as a foreign agent. The conversation lasted 2 hours, during which Dr. Petrov gradually revealed the scope of what he was really offering. The research position in Switzerland was real, but it would involve sharing her navigation techniques with an international team that included scientists from countries hostile to American interests. Sarah would be well compensated, and her work would receive global recognition, but she would also be betraying every principle she had been raised to believe in. As they parted ways, Dr. Petrov handed Sarah a business card with contact information for what appeared to be a legitimate research institute. He encouraged her to think carefully about the opportunities they had discussed and mentioned that his colleagues were very eager to meet her. The implication was clear. This was not just an academic offer, but a recruitment attempt by a sophisticated intelligence operation. Sarah's handler debriefing that evening revealed the full extent of what surveillance had uncovered. Dr. Petrov was part of a network that had been operating in American universities for years, identifying and recruiting promising students in strategic fields. The Swiss Research Institute was a front operation, and several American scientists who had accepted similar offers had disappeared from public view entirely. The government's response plan was now clear. Rather than simply arresting Dr. Petrov, they would use Sarah's apparent cooperation to map the entire foreign network. She would express interest in the Swiss position, while intelligence services tracked every communication and contact. The operation would roll up multiple foreign agents and potentially prevent future recruitment attempts. Sarah's next meeting with Dr. Petrov took place at an upscale restaurant downtown, far from the university campus. She brought research materials that appeared classified, but had actually been prepared by government scientists specifically for this operation. Dr. Petrov's excitement was evident as he reviewed Sarah's work, and he immediately arranged for her to meet his supervisor. The supervisor, introduced as Dr. Zhang, was a woman of indeterminate age who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from years of high-stakes operations. Her technical knowledge was even more impressive than Dr. Petrov's, and her questions about Sarah's research were precise, enough to make Sarah grateful for the extensive coaching she had received from government experts. Dr. Zhang explained that Sarah's transition to the Swiss position would need to happen quickly for security reasons. They had arranged for her to withdraw from the university citing family emergencies, and a private jet would transport her to Europe within the week. The timeline was aggressive, but they emphasized that waiting would expose her to risks from American intelligence services who might discover her plans. Sarah expressed enthusiasm while internally marveling at how completely the foreign team had misread the situation. They believed they were recruiting a naive college student who could be easily manipulated, not realizing that she was the central figure in a counterintelligence operation designed to destroy their entire network. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. As the dinner concluded with firm arrangements for Sarah's departure, she felt a mixture of anticipation and fear about what would happen next. The government's plan called for her to board the private jet as scheduled, but federal agents would intercept the aircraft before it reached international airspace. The operation's success would depend on perfect timing and coordination between multiple agencies, with Sarah at the center of it all. The day of departure arrived with an unseasonable spring storm that seemed to mirror the tension crackling through the air around campus. Sarah packed a single suitcase according to Dr. Zhang's instructions, including personal items that would make her disappearance appear sudden, but believable. Hidden among her clothes were tracking devices and communication equipment, so sophisticated that they looked like ordinary college accessories. Agent Rodriguez conducted a final briefing in Sarah's apartment that morning, reviewing every aspect of the operation while storm clouds gathered outside. The plan was precise but dangerous. Sarah would board the private jet at a small airfield outside the city, allowing the foreign agents to believe their recruitment had succeeded. Federal interceptors would then force the aircraft to land at a secure military base where the entire network could be captured. The margin for error was razor thin. If the foreign agents suspected the operation was compromised, they might eliminate Sarah rather than risk exposure. If the federal response was too early or too late, critical intelligence could be lost forever. Sarah's safety depended on timing measured in minutes and communication systems that had never been tested under operational conditions. As Sarah prepared to leave for the airfield, her secure phone buzzed with an emergency message. Intelligence. Intercepts had detected unusual activity around the departure location. Additional foreign personnel who weren't part of the original recruitment team. The operation was becoming more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Agent Rodriguez made the difficult decision to proceed, knowing that aborting now might prevent them from ever uncovering the full scope of the foreign network. The drive to the airfield took place in complete silence, with Sarah's government escort maintaining radio contact with command centers across the region. Sarah could feel the weight of invisible eyes watching every mile of their progress, knowing that satellite surveillance, electronic monitoring, and tactical teams were all coordinating to ensure her safety. The teenage girl who had worried about making friends in college was now the focal point of a military operation involving hundreds of personnel. Dr. Petrov was waiting at the airfield with a confidence that suggested complete faith in his mission's success. He helped Sarah transfer her luggage to the private jet, while expressing enthusiasm about the research opportunities awaiting her in Switzerland. The aircraft was larger and more luxurious than Sarah had expected, equipped with communication systems and passenger amenities that suggested serious financial backing. Dr. Zhang emerged from the aircraft's cabin as they approached, accompanied by two men Sarah hadn't met before. Their introduction as security consultants did nothing to disguise their obvious military training, and Sarah realized that the foreign team was taking no chances with their valuable recruitment. The presence of additional personnel complicated the federal response plan, but Sarah maintained her cover while silently updating her assessment of the situation. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Sarah took her assigned seat near a window, watching the storm clouds building on the horizon. The communication device hidden in her jacket was transmitting her location to federal commanders who were tracking the aircraft's progress with multiple redundant systems. Sarah knew that fighter jets were already airborne and positioned to intercept, but the timing would have to be perfect to avoid an international incident. The aircraft climbed through the turbulent weather, and Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by the foreign team's attention to detail. The cabin was equipped with research materials and technical specifications that would have convinced most observers of the operation's legitimacy. Dr. Zhang began briefing Sarah on the Swiss facility and the colleagues she would be working with, painting a picture of scientific collaboration that might have been appealing under different circumstances. 20 minutes into the flight, Sarah felt the aircraft begin an unexpected course change. Dr. Petrov's explanation about weather routing seemed reasonable, but Sarah recognized the maneuver as an attempt to evade the federal intercept she knew was coming. The foreign team was more sophisticated than intelligence estimates had suggested, and they had apparently detected signs of government surveillance. The realization that the operation was compromised hit everyone simultaneously. Dr. Zhang's demeanor shifted from collegial to coldly professional as she acknowledged that their communications had been monitored. Sarah found herself facing three people who now saw her not as a valuable recruit, but as a security threat that needed to be managed. The atmosphere in the cabin became charged with a tension that made Sarah acutely aware of how far from safety she really was. Dr. Zhang's questions became sharper and more pointed as she probed for evidence of Sarah's cooperation with American authorities. Sarah maintained her cover story while calculating distances to exits and emergency equipment, drawing on training she had hoped never to use. The aircraft was still climbing through the storm, but Sarah could hear changes in engine noise that suggested their destination was no longer Switzerland. The secure communication device hidden in Sarah's jacket chose that moment to emit a barely audible signal, indicating that federal forces were moving into intercept position. Dr. Zhang's expression confirmed that she had heard the sound and understood its significance. Sarah realized that her carefully planned infiltration mission had just become a survival situation where her academic brilliance might be less important than her ability to think quickly under extreme pressure. The confrontation in the aircraft cabin erupted with sudden violence that shattered the pretense of academic collaboration. Dr. Zhang produced a weapon while simultaneously ordering the pilot to change course toward international waters, but Sarah's training kicked in with surprising effectiveness. The months of preparation and the adrenaline of genuine danger combined to give her reflexes she never knew she possessed. Sarah dove toward the emergency communication panel she had identified during her pre-flight assessment, activating a distress beacon that would guide federal interceptors directly to their location. Dr. Petrov lunged to stop her, but the aircraft's turbulence from the storm worked in Sarah's favor, sending him stumbling across the cabin. The two security consultants moved with professional efficiency, but the cramped quarters of the aircraft limited their ability to coordinate. Outside the storm-lashed windows, Sarah caught glimpses of military aircraft materializing through the clouds like mechanical angels. The federal response was overwhelming and precisely coordinated, with fighter jets flanking the private aircraft while helicopter gunships closed from multiple directions. Dr. Zhang's attempts to negotiate with air traffic control were met with stern orders to land immediately. At a designated military facility, the foreign team's sophisticated planning had not anticipated the level of resources the American government was willing to commit to Sarah's protection. As military escort fighters took positions around their aircraft, Dr. Zhang realized that resistance would be futile. The private jet was effectively surrounded by enough firepower to vaporize it instantly, leaving no room for the kind of dramatic escape scenarios that might work in movies. Sarah watched Dr. Petrov's face as the reality of capture settled over him. The charming academic facade crumbled completely, replaced by the cold professionalism of a career intelligence operative who understood that his mission had failed catastrophically. Dr. Zhang was already destroying documents and communication equipment, following protocols designed to minimize the intelligence value of their capture. The forced landing at Edwards Air Force Base happened with military precision that impressed even the captured foreign agents. Sarah found herself surrounded by Delta Force operators, whose professional competence made her feel safer than she had in months. Agent Rodriguez was waiting on the tarmac with a smile that mixed relief with genuine admiration for how Sarah had handled an impossible situation. The debriefing process revealed the full scope of what they had accomplished. The captured foreign team included two of the most wanted intelligence operatives in the world, and their communication equipment contained information that would allow American counterintelligence to roll up networks spanning multiple continents. Sarah's courage in maintaining her cover under extreme pressure had enabled the most significant counterintelligence success in decades. Colonel Hayes arrived at Edwards within hours, bringing news that transformed Sarah's understanding of her future. The quantum navigation breakthrough that had started everything was being declassified for commercial development, with Sarah named as the primary inventor. The patent applications alone would make her financially independent, while her proven ability to handle classified projects opened doors to opportunities she could barely imagine. The media attention was carefully managed to protect Sarah's identity and operational security, but her success became a closely guarded legend within government circles. She was offered positions with defense contractors, space agencies, and research institutions that would have taken ordinary scientists decades to achieve. The shy freshman who had worried about making friends was now being courted by some of the most powerful organizations in the world. Sarah's decision surprised everyone who thought they understood her. Rather than accepting any of the prestigious offers, she chose to return to the university to complete her degree, albeit with security arrangements that would remain in place permanently. She wanted to prove to herself that she could succeed as a normal student, even after everything she had experienced. The Delta Force helicopters that touched down on campus 6 months later were part of a routine security exercise, but they served as a visible reminder of how dramatically Sarah's life had changed. Students gathered to watch the impressive display of military hardware, completely unaware that the quiet girl in their engineering classes was the reason for the demonstration. Dr. Martinez welcomed Sarah back to his advanced propulsion seminar with a knowing smile, having finally been briefed on where his most promising student had really been during her extended absence. Sarah took her usual seat near the back of the lecture hall, surrounded by classmates who had no idea they were studying alongside someone who had helped reshape the landscape of international espionage. As Sarah opened her notebook and prepared to tackle ordinary differential equations after months of quantum encryption protocols and counterintelligence operations, she reflected on how completely her life had been transformed. She was still the same person who loved the pure mathematics of orbital mechanics, but she now understood that knowledge always carried responsibility, and that brilliance without wisdom could be more dangerous than ignorance. The helicopter rotors fading into the distance marked not just the end of a security exercise, but Sarah's transition from reluctant participant in global conflict to someone who had chosen to embrace both the opportunities and obligations that came with her unique talents. She was no longer just a freshman trying to blend into the crowd. She was someone who had proven that extraordinary circumstances could reveal extraordinary capabilities in the most unlikely people.